Welcome to the Compassion Fatigue Podcast with your host, Jennifer Blau. You're listening to Session 24. My guest today is Sovann Pen, a health coach and health educator with the Kaiser Permanente Health Engagement and Wellness Services Department. He is also a licensed professional counselor. His professional interests include individual and marriage counseling, coaching, personality, emotional intelligence, leadership, parenting, sleep disorders, burnout, and addiction. Here's some fun facts about Sovann. He has been married for 22 years, has 3 kids ages 12 through 20, enjoys time with family, church activities, reading, training and coaching martial arts, and watching sports. In the past, Sovann has coordinated the Kaiser Permanente Insomnia Clinic and instructed students in the counseling department at Western Seminary. Over the past 21 years, he has talked with hundreds of people, both individually as well as in groups, about sleep in his work as a research assistant, sleep technologist, CPAP specialist, insomnia group instructor, counselor, and coach. Here today to talk all about the benefits of sleep and how we can, quite frankly, get more of it. Please welcome Sovann Pen. Hey there, Sovann. Thanks so much for joining us today on the Compassion Fatigue Podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Jen.
Absolutely. I'm really excited for this conversation. I know so many of our listeners really struggle with sleep. And, whether you have the type of job where you're on call during the night, or maybe you happen to work a midnight shift, one of the things that I often struggle with are some intrusive thoughts regarding animal abuse that sometimes pop into my head and interfere with my sleep. So I think our audience is really going to get a lot out of this. So I want to start by asking you, how did you go about developing an expertise in sleep?
When I was a student in grad school, my part-time job started out as a sleep technician and a research assistant at the local medical school in the sleep and mood disorders lab. And so I helped out with the research that was being done on melatonin hormone and light therapy for different types of sleep disorders. So we studied insomnia, the different types. We studied seasonal affective disorder and winter depression. And we also studied circadian rhythm disorders, so disorders of the internal body clock. So we did research for shift workers, for elderly people with insomnia, and we did research for winter depression. And so it started out there. And then for almost 14 years, worked with folks with snoring and sleep apnea, and then eventually ended up doing groups and individual appointments for folks with insomnia.
And so we were talking before we started recording the show that, sleep difficulties are very common with conditions such as anxiety, depression, and of course, compassion fatigue and burnout. Can you tell our audience what are some of the short-term as well as long-term consequences of sleep deprivation?
Sure. When our sleep is disrupted and we don't get enough sleep or good quality sleep, it affects us in several areas, right? It can affect our emotions and it can affect us cognitively. So some folks, it affects their mood. They either ramp up and their thoughts start racing. They have a hard time turning their brain off at night. It increases their stress and anxiety. For some folks, they get really tired and exhausted, so it affects their mood. It can also affect us at work or in relationships, so it can make us cranky and irritable. Some folks, it affects their memory and their concentration, so it can affect school performance, or it can be a safety issue on the job too, if you're prone to make mistakes or even your own safety. If your job involves, the need to be focused and attentive. So it can affect us mentally and emotionally. It can also affect our health long term. A lot of folks, they can tough out sleep deprivation for a short period of time. And some folks even do it for years. But over time, it takes a toll and it can affect so many different areas of our health, our cardiovascular health. It can affect our body's ability to heal and repair. And for a lot of folks, it really affects their metabolism. So it can affect their vulnerability to developing diabetes, and also being overweight.
Wow. So it sounds like, in addition to the emotional consequences, there's a lot of physical and health related issues that can result, right?
Sure. Another one I forgot to mention, it can really affect folks with chronic pain, sleep deprivation. It's kind of a chicken or the egg thing with things like chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia. Folks that struggle with migraines, it can trigger migraines, sleep deprivation can, or it can make the migraines worse. Or sometimes the migraines affect the sleep. So it can start to get really complicated and messy.
It's like a vicious cycle. And many people, I'm sure you're familiar with insomnia. That's, not getting enough sleep. But what I think, a lot of people don't realize, there's different types of insomnia, right?
That's right. So the most common version of insomnia that people think of is having a hard time getting to sleep. So that's going to bed and then just tossing and turning and not being able to shut down and get to sleep when you want to. So that's called sleep onset insomnia. But there's another type of insomnia where you might go right to sleep because you're really tired and exhausted, but then halfway through the night or a couple of hours before you want to get out of bed, you might wake up. So some folks, they might go to bed at 10 and then feel wide awake at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then their alarm is set for 6 and they're tossing and turning in the middle of the night. So that's called sleep maintenance insomnia, having trouble maintaining sleep. The other type of insomnia is sleep that's non-restorative or poor quality. So some folks, they stay in bed the whole time between 10 and 6, but they're waking up every hour or every other hour, or they're just tossing and turning all night. And it feels like they're just half awake, half asleep throughout the night. And then they don't wake up feeling rested.
So it sounds like it's more about quality than quantity, because I know there's a lot of debate. Oh, how many hours of sleep should adults get? Do you have a recommendation, or is it really more of the quality versus the quantity, the hours?
The quality of sleep is something that you want to be aware of, and you want to get good quality sleep, and you also want to get enough sleep. So one way to determine if you're getting enough sleep, because it varies from person to person, is how much sleep would you need to get to wake up feeling rested and alert without needing an alarm clock to wake up.
That makes a
And
lot of sense.
yeah, and so some folks, they short themselves during the work week, and then on the weekend they sleep in and they try to catch up on sleep. When you get enough sleep during the night and it's good quality sleep, then you don't feel the need to catch up on the weekends on your days off. And you shouldn't need to take naps during the day. You should get all your sleeping done at night.
So we're going to talk a little bit about sleep hygiene a little bit later, but from what I'm hearing you say, sleeping in on the weekends, although sometimes it feels really good,
Mm-hmm.
it's a no-no, isn't it?
If you're not sleeping well at night, it's not sleeping in on the weekends is one of the things that can help with resetting your body clock and getting better sleep.
Okay, that makes sense. And so can you explain this concept of negative sleep thoughts, which I'm sure I struggle with, and what's called the Spielman model?
Sure. So negative sleep thoughts are kind of the automatic thoughts that creep in when we start having sleep problems. And so negative sleep thoughts are the things that we think that pop into our head at 2 o'clock in the morning if you wake up and have to get up to use the bathroom. And so some folks here's an example. So here's a positive sleep thought. If I am sleeping fine and I wake up at 2 in the morning and I have to get up at 6, if I'm a good sleeper and I don't have a problem with sleep, I'll wake up at 2 and think, oh, I've got 4 more hours to sleep. Folks that have negative sleep thoughts that wake up at 2, their first immediate thought is, oh no, I've only got 4 more hours to sleep.
Makes sense.
And the problem with negative sleep thoughts is that they lead to other negative sleep thoughts. So it's, oh no, I'm awake. I'm not going to be able to get back to sleep. Tomorrow's going to be miserable. I've got so much work to do. It's going to be terrible. And you go down that vicious cycle of more negative sleep thoughts. And so they start amplifying and getting louder and louder, faster and faster. And part of that's a mental process, but part of that is the mind-body connection. Part of that, your body starts squirting with adrenaline and cortisol, the stress hormones. And that is like pushing the gas pedal on your thoughts. And then pretty soon you're really wide awake and you're stressed about getting back to sleep. And that's not the state that you want to be in to get back to sleep. Some folks get those negative sleep thoughts in the middle of the night, but when you have chronic insomnia, sometimes the negative sleep thoughts happen throughout the day. And then especially in the evening between dinner and bedtime, where some folks, they just start obsessing and worrying about how bad the night of sleep is going to be. So they start predicting. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy about how bad their night is going to be.
And so how do we go about kind of reversing that cycle and turning negative sleep thoughts either into positive sleep thoughts or just, kind of neutral thoughts?
Yes, that's a great point. Sometimes you can't replace it with a positive sleep thought. Sometimes just making it neutral is better. You can learn different ways to deal with the negative sleep thoughts. Some books on insomnia and also books on anxiety and depression call them hot thoughts. So those are the thoughts that kind of stimulate us. So one of the techniques is cognitive restructuring. And the different self-help books on insomnia, most of them are based on cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia or have an element of mindfulness. And cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness teach you ways to cool those hot thoughts and replace those negative thoughts. So very often, learning cognitive restructuring, learning relaxation, and learning guided imagery, those are other things that can help with negative sleep thoughts. Usually, it can lead to an improvement in your sleep in just 4 to 6 weeks.
Things like, maybe mindful deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, guided meditation, things like that before bedtime might help?
Yes. If you're not already practicing those are probably the first thing to learn and start implementing with your
Okay.
sleep.
Yeah. And so can you explain what the Spielman model is? I found this really fascinating when I learned about it. So can you share with our listeners what that looks like?
Sure. So the Spielman model is a helpful way of just kind of understanding your relationship with sleep. And it can help you understand kind of what happened with your sleep. The 3P factor model is another name for the Spielman model. And so there's 3 different factors that can affect your sleep over time. The first one is your predisposing factor or your predisposition toward insomnia. And so those are things that essentially can be inherited. Some folks, they have a low predisposition for insomnia or like a low vulnerability to having sleep problems. And some folks have a higher one. So that can be a tendency towards cognitive or physiologic hyperarousal. So those are some long words, but but folks that have a tendency to think and move fast. And so folks that are type A personalities, if you're really creative, if you like problem solving, if you're really analytical or introspective, those can be predisposing factors for insomnia. Basically, it doesn't take much for you to have a bad night of sleep.
What about folks that are either have a lot of empathy or highly sensitive personalities? Does that make you kind of vulnerable to insomnia as well?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
yeah.
So if you take on the emotions and of others, if you just have a concern for helping others, it can be hard to turn off. It can be hard to kind of set that boundary or on the day of processing what you went through that day. And so for folks in the helping profession, that sleep can be an issue. For parents who have got a lot going on with work and family, and even for parents where their kids have left the home already and they're concerned about how their adult kids are doing outside of the home, it can definitely make you vulnerable to insomnia. So those are some of the predisposing factors. The precipitating factor is kind of what triggered a sleep problem. Most of us, at some point, there's an event that made sleep worse. And so I like to tell folks that, sleep happens. And what I mean by that, poor sleep happens to everyone at some point. So whether it's a stressful event or a stressful change, like losing your job or divorce or conflict, job stress, that can be a precipitating factor. But even positive changes can precipitate insomnia. So looking forward to spring break, looking forward to a vacation, getting married, going off to school, getting married and anticipating the wedding and the honeymoon, anticipating positive things can also trigger insomnia. One of the things that we hope is that whatever caused the problem, things settle down, you get used to the change, and you go back to your old way of sleeping. So one of the most common precipitating events for women is pregnancy and childbirth. So moms get used to staying up or waking up every few hours to feed the baby and change the baby. And what happens is, even though the baby starts sleeping through the night, mom is still waking up every 2 or 3 hours because she's essentially trained herself to be half awake, half asleep, and to wake up at those times.
So I imagine, say you're an animal control officer and you're on call at night and you're used to getting, having your radio go off every couple hours, you probably are almost training yourself to be on alert for that.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
And if you're on call, part of you can't give yourself permission to fully turn off and get that deep stage of sleep, because you have to be able to wake up quickly and be able to respond to that call.
Yeah, jump in your uniform and off you go. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Shift work and on-call work can definitely be a precipitating factor. The third factor, the perpetuating factor, is kind of the thing that we have the most control over, right? We can't control our genetics, can't control our personality so much. We can't control what happened to us with the precipitating factors. But the predisposing factors are often the things that we do in the acute phase of the insomnia, or in the short term, to survive and cope and get through the day. But sometimes they end up keeping us stuck and perpetuating the insomnia. So the thing that caused the insomnia goes away or gets better, but now the problem is the problem. The problem is the fact that we have insomnia, and that's what makes it become a chronic problem.
How can we go about reversing this problem now? So I know we talked about not catching up on sleep during the weekends, and then maybe practicing some relaxation techniques at night. What are some other examples of healthy or good sleep hygiene?
One thing that can really help is to be self-aware of how much stress you're under. And what I like to recommend to folks is that they take their emotional temperature. And you can do that just by scale of 1 to 10, how much stress you're feeling or experiencing. And very often, good sleep hygiene or good sleep habits, the ones that will work, are the ones that address your stress level. And so self-care, giving yourself permission to deal with your stress throughout the day, not just in that last hour or half hour before bedtime, but preventing that stress from accumulating and building up, ramping up throughout the day, is one thing that can really help.
So things like maybe working out or taking a walk, getting a massage, meditating, taking a yoga class, doing something during the day rather than, like you said, just letting it all build up and then expecting your brain to turn off.
Right. Very often, if you go to your doctor and talk about sleep issues, they'll hand you a list of maybe 10 or a dozen sleep habits, good sleep habits or sleep hygiene. Things like dark room, not eating in bed, turning off your TV, having a comfortable pillow and mattress, lots of sleep environment things. And those can be really good things. But for a lot of folks, if their stress level or their arousal, mental and physiologic arousal, are 7 or 8 on a scale of 1 to 10, it doesn't matter how expensive or comfortable your bed is or how dark and quiet your room is if you can't turn your body off and you can't turn your mind off.
And is that part of the problem with either keeping the TV on or even your cell phone or laptop right until you try to sleep? Is it's kind of keeps the brain stimulated a while after you try to sleep?
Yes, yeah. And it varies. Like some folks, the TV or screen, phone or laptop is a way of disconnecting from the day and making the transition. But for more and more folks, the phone in the bed or a tablet in bed is part of that perpetuating factor. We used to tell folks to kick your TV out of your bed. So 15 years ago, when I was teaching insomnia classes, I'd recommend that. But then after a while, I gave up that fight because it just wasn't worth the battle. But kind of the key is, and it's your iPhone or your tablet in bed. My main question for folks is what you're doing working? And that's whether it's with the screens or iPhones or any other of the sleep habits. Because you have to kind of customize your bedtime routine and you have to kind of customize the different sleep hygiene elements and the combination of them that's actually going to work for you. So some folks, they can get away with reading in bed. They can get away with watching YouTube on their phone in bed. But if it's not working, then think about doing an experiment and trying without it for at least 2 weeks and give it a fair shot to see if it improves the quality of your sleep. For me, I don't bring my cell phone in my room anymore at bedtime. I used to use it as my alarm clock, but what I found was it's just too easy to check email or look on social media or sports websites. So I leave my phone in another room and I use an old school alarm clock now, and that's improved my ability to get to sleep and to get enough sleep.
Yeah, so I really like what you say about it being kind of a personal, almost experiment to see, kind of what works for you. And here's a huge nerd alert for myself. So just a warning. So every night, my husband and I, and I'm not 85 years old, but we watch reruns of Perry Mason in bed. We'll watch, maybe 15, 20 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you what, that is my cue. It has become my cue for falling asleep. And it's to the point now where I have to have that 15 or 20 minutes to, like you said, just kind of disconnect from the day.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've seen these episodes, 75 times, and it doesn't matter. There's something very kind of comforting in this routine that I've created, and it works for me.
Yes. And so I've heard that so much, Jen, like some folks that they'll listen to reruns like Seinfeld, and they're not even really paying attention to the show. They're not engrossed in it. It's just kind of background. And I think you said it's comforting. It's soothing. It's familiar, and sometimes it can just be a break from what you went through with work or something that you might have read or seen in the news that might be stimulating and upsetting. And
that would be every day.
Yes. So, like in terms of like what to watch in the evening is it working for you? Like some folks, late night talk show, it's just kind of silly. It's banter. But being on a news website or watching reruns of CSI or even the local news, is it soothing? Is it calming? Is it quieting and slowing your mind down? Or is it ramping you up? Is it agitating you and making you feel uncertain or insecure about the world and your future? Paying attention to your inputs is key.
Yeah, I like that. So it's not, no electronics in the room is not a hard and fast rule. It's experiment. Find out what works for you, right?
Right. My wife, or while she would do crossword puzzles, but it depends on your personality. For her, she would just do 2 or 3 of the words, and then she would be able to set it down. If your personality is that you can't put it down until you finish the crossword, then maybe that's not the right thing for you. And so if you can't start a movie without finishing it, then maybe watching a movie at bedtime isn't good for you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so this next topic might not be a hard and fast rule. I don't know. Let's see your opinion on this. So napping during the day, good or bad?
Mm-hmm. So napping is one of those perpetuating factors. But again, it's not whether it's good or bad, is how is it affecting your sleep? I like to talk about napping and coffee because those are like the two main things that people use to kind of cope with sleep problems. Are you napping or are you drinking coffee because you want to or because you need to?
Ah, okay.
See, so if you have to take a nap or drink coffee to get through the day, then it's probably perpetuating your sleep problem. If a 15, 20-minute nap every once in a while, and if you're retired, that's great. Cup of coffee is a great way to start the day. But if you're needing a 2-3 hour nap just so you can make it to bedtime, or you find yourself napping and dozing off inappropriately, then one of the key things is to try not to nap or reduce the amount of naps. So some folks, when I meet with them, they may nap like 2 hours, and I encourage them to try to cut it down to 1 hour. If they're napping 1 hour, I encourage them to cut it down to 30 minutes. And if they're napping 30 minutes, I encourage them, well, try an experiment, try not napping at all. And the reason for that, Jen, is that we have an ideal sleep time in a 24-hour period. And that can vary, but it might be 8 hours, it might be 7 hours. But any sleep that we do during the day steals away from our appetite for sleep at night. So if I need 7 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period, but I nap 2 hours during the day, then my body's only going to want 5 hours at night. And then the vicious cycle happens. Well, I only got 5 hours of sleep at night, so I'm going to take a 2 hour nap during the day.
Then the cycle continues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with coffee. Coffee is a stimulant. So what happens, the precipitating thing is, well, I have some bad nights of sleep, so I start drinking coffee or energy drinks, or I have cravings for carbohydrates and comfort food, because that's another way our body compensates for being sleep deprived is eating and overeating. Is I'm not sleeping, my body needs energy, so I do these things to get through the day short term, but those things end up disrupting the quality of my sleep and keep me stuck in that vicious cycle.
So if you struggle with insomnia, when should you stop drinking caffeinated drinks? And also, when should you not exercise? Like, I know you're not supposed to exercise within a certain amount of time, and you're not supposed to have caffeine within a certain amount of time. Is that right?
Yeah. So recommend not drinking caffeine, especially if you're having trouble sleeping, after noon. And for afternoon lull and energy, when you might normally drink coffee or a caffeinated drink, is to instead replace that with like a walk and try to kind of push through that drowsiness. And same thing with nap. If you normally take like a 20, 30-minute nap, try to just kind of push through and stay active. And both of those things will increase your appetite and your drive to sleep, get to sleep, but it also help you sleep deeper at night. Exercise. What you usually recommend if you have a hard time getting to sleep is to exercise in the first half of the day, if at all possible, and try not to exercise too hard or too much in a 3-4 hour period before bedtime. That's for most folks. There are exceptional people that can go to the gym at 8 or 9 o'clock at night and go to bed pretty easily, but they're the exception.
So I went to the gym the other night and lifted weights, and I have to tell you that was a huge mistake. I was up till 3 o'clock in the morning.
Oh,
But when I take a yoga class, I've just started taking yoga classes at night. That's a tough workout, but let me tell you, I get fantastic sleep afterward.
yes, because it's a different type of workout. So
Mm-hmm.
yoga is triggering the relaxation, and you do lots of diaphragmatic breathing, deep breathing, and you're calming and quieting your body. And so light yoga, depending on how intense it is, Pilates, stretching, going for a walk around the block after dinner. Those are all helpful self-care things that help you reduce your stimulation. But like pushing it on the treadmill or work lifting weights in late evening, is definitely stimulating. And one of the reasons why is in the evening, to get a good night of sleep, our body starts producing melatonin when the sun sets, when it gets dark. So melatonin is the signal that our body naturally produces to prepare ourselves for sleep. And one of the things that it does is it reduces our core body temperature. And so it's kind of when it gets dark and our body starts producing melatonin, our body subconsciously is saying, "Oh, the day's starting to wind down. We're cooling down. It's time to wrap things up, get tucked into bed, and kind of hibernate for the night." And so when we work out too late, instead of our core body temperature cooling down, we're elevating our core body temperature, and that can be stimulating and make it hard for us to get to sleep.
So, speaking of melatonin, what is your opinion on using natural supplements, whether it's like a valerian or melatonin supplement?
So melatonin, like I mentioned, it's the signal that it's sunset or evening. And so it helps most with folks that have a shift in their internal body clock. So it can be helpful if you're having trouble getting to sleep or if you're having trouble staying asleep to try melatonin for 3 weeks, because it will help you shift into the right time zone. It'll help you shift your body clock. If it doesn't work within 2 or 3 weeks, then your sleep disruption is due to another thing. It probably won't help. So melatonin can help as an experiment, but you don't want to use it long term. And definitely don't recommend it for teens and younger, because kids and teens are producing plenty of natural melatonin on their own. You shouldn't need to supplement their sleep with melatonin. Do you have any questions about melatonin?
Well, I know that I've seen different dosages, like up to 10 milligrams. Should you talk to your doctor about, what's an appropriate dosage?
Yeah, it can help to ask your doctor. When I started out 20 years ago, you'd see 10 milligrams commonly in the stores, and you might see 5, you might see 3, you might see 1. What I recommend is, if you're going to try it, is to start out with a low dose. When we did studies for melatonin on sleep, we used zero point 0.3 and zero point 0.5 milligram doses. And so the amount of melatonin isn't what makes it work. It's the timing of when you take the melatonin is what signals your body and resets your body clock. So you're not needing a huge doses. So, and a lot of folks have experienced this. They've tried melatonin and they say it doesn't work because melatonin doesn't make you drowsy and sleepy at bedtime. So cough syrup and a shot of whiskey work better than melatonin at making you drowsy. It doesn't knock you out.
Okay, so speaking of that shot of whiskey, what is
Mhm.
your opinion on using alcohol or even sleeping pills to help with sleep?
My opinion, and what I encourage folks to do, is to try to sleep naturally as much as you can and to not become dependent on alcohol or sleeping pills to get to sleep. Now, occasional Tylenol PM or even getting a prescription for Ambien or Trazodone, that can help, especially if you're really struggling with sleep. What we hope is the correct use of sleep medication is that you use it short term to kind of get you through a hard time and prevent yourself from developing chronic sleep problems. But once you start sleeping fine, then not becoming dependent on it. Because the challenge with wine or alcohol, the challenge with sleeping pills is, instead of taking it once or twice a week, some folks, they start developing needing to do it most nights or every night, or they start needing to use more and more to get the same effect. And I've met with so many folks where 10, 15, 20 years in to using sleep medications, they're using more and more. They're getting half a night of bad sleep and they just feel like a zombie. It can be really tough. When you learn cognitive restructuring, when you learn progressive muscle relaxation and guided imagery, so much of those tools can serve the purpose of preparing your body and your mind for sleep so that you don't end up needing to be dependent on alcohol or sleeping medications.
So if people, give this a shot, they maybe create an exercise routine and they cut back on the caffeine and the alcohol and they learn to relax at night and they're still struggling.
Mm.
When is it time to see your doctor or a sleep specialist?
That's a great question, Jen. So the self-help, the self-directed programs and books for insomnia, if you're not sleeping and feeling better in 4 to 6 weeks, then it's probably helpful to talk to your doctor to get a referral for a sleep doctor appointment, or to be seen in a sleep clinic. There's so many different sleep disorders, and it's very often it's not just a matter of turning your mind off.
To be fair, you have to give it, like you said, 4 to 6 weeks of really kind of changing your routines and improving your self-care and adding all these, what we call good sleep habits.
Right. And there's a website, sleepnet.com, that folks can go to. In the top left-hand corner, it says take a sleep test. And there's a list of about 42, 43 different symptoms. And if you go to that site and check those off, and you might need someone to help you fill it out because a lot of the questions are for when you're asleep and you might not know what's going on when
Like
you're
if you
asleep.
snore or roll around, things like that.
Right. Or if you're talking in your sleep.
Okay, yeah.
Things like that. But when you fill it out, if you fill out a significant amount of them, the more symptoms you have, the more it's disrupting your life, then, the more urgent it might be to get it checked out, to get some help with it, especially if it's affecting your quality of life.
Yeah.
So many people, when they get to the point where they're sleeping 4 hours or less a night, just half a night of sleep, and they're just waking up feeling miserable and dreading getting through the day. When you're tired and exhausted, it can be such a struggle to just essentially, it feels like you're just fighting for your life, like you're just trying to survive. And it can really amplify depression. It can really amplify anxiety. For anyone listening, are you to the point where you're tired of being tired? So many people, they tough it out. And you've probably seen this, Jen, like folks with anxiety and depression, but they're in a role or they have responsibilities that they feel like they just can't stop to take care of themselves. They have so many people relying on them, and maybe they're perfectionistic. They have really high expectations. So they develop a high pain tolerance for neglecting themselves, and they just keep pushing. But like I said, it eventually catches up to you. And when the wheels fall off, it can be pretty messy. And so don't wait till that point. Hopefully, if you see yourself heading in that direction, talking to someone about how you're feeling is a good first step.
So do you have any books or other resources that you can recommend? Some of your personal favorites?
Oh, sure. 2 of them are from Harvard. One is a book, Say Goodnight to Insomnia, is the 6-week solution for sleep. And that's by Dr. Greg Jacobs. He talks about negative sleep thoughts and how to replace those. The Harvard Sleep website is really helpful. There's a lot of short videos that talk about different types of sleep problems, and that can be really helpful, especially if you're concerned about somebody else's sleep and you're encouraging them to get their sleep problem worked on or checked out. Sometimes they don't want to read a book or they don't want to read an article. Sometimes watching a short video can be helpful. So that's one book. Another book by Dr. Spielman, the inventor of the Spielman model. His book is The Insomnia Answer. And that's a really good book if you're a visual learner, because they've got lots of good diagrams and it's pretty concise and helpful. If you need an overview of sleep, we kind of talked about insomnia, but if you want to learn more about restless leg syndrome, periodic leg movements, sleepwalking, sleep talking, sleep apnea, the book called The Promise of Sleep by William Dement is an excellent book, and it's a great overview.
Awesome. Well, I am definitely going to put links to all of those resources on the show notes page over at the CompassionFatiguePodcast.com. So, Sovann, how can people find out more about you and what you do and maybe even get in touch?
My website, Jen, is SovannPen.com, and that's a good place to find me. I also post articles and links on a New Day Counseling Facebook page. our clinic's website is anewdaycounseling.org.
Fantastic. And of course, I'll put those links up as well. Sovann, thank you so much. This conversation has just been absolutely insightful, and I really hope our listeners got a lot out of this. I know that I certainly did. Thanks again, Sovann.
You're welcome, Jen. Thanks for the opportunity.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Compassion Fatigue podcast. Please head on over to iTunes and subscribe to the show so you never miss a single episode. And check out the CompassionFatiguePodcast.com for more great resources, including a link to join our private Facebook group. Please note that this podcast is not meant to provide medical advice or substitute for psychological care. Please consult with a mental health professional if you need additional support. And if you are feeling suicidal, please go to your nearest emergency room or call 911.